Okay, this is video 7 and the last video for the Quarter 2 language study. This is a bit of a review, but we're adding one new thing. We're going to talk about clauses and sentence structure. We're going to review complex sentences. We're going to review compound sentences. We're also going to talk about a combination of the two, compound complex sentences. And those are the last types of sentences there are. So to review, a complex sentence contains a main clause and one or more subordinate clauses, or a independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Right? We played charades by candlelight is the independent clause, and when the electricity went out is the dependent clause. As this stating, don't be confused, the electricity went out isn't a complete sentence, so it could be an independent clause, but the use of the subordinate conjunction when makes it a dependent or subordinate clause. Okay? So we played charades by candlelight when the electricity went out. It's not on here, but let's review compound sentences real quick. Compound sentences are two or more independent clauses, so an independent clause and another independent clause, and they're joined by a semicolon, not forget my period, or they're joined by that comma coordinating conjunction, period. So complex sentences and compound sentences. There's a type of sentence called compound complex that has more than one main clause or independent clause and one or more subordinate dependent clauses. So basically 3 clauses or more. So let's take a look. In this case, we've got a subordinate clause or a dependent clause and 2 independent clauses. Whenever we have an ice storm, comma, the twins go skating, comma, and I enjoy the peace. So what I've got here is dependent clause, comma, independent clause, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent clause. So I just sort of combined 2 of my formulas. And I've shown you here, remember, we can have independent clause joined by a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or we could have independent clause joined by a semicolon. And if I just tack on this dependent clause at the beginning or at the end, that can be part of my formula too. So we'll take a look at a few. If you had no problems with complex or compound sentences before, this should be pretty easy. If you didn't, you're going to maybe want to go back and do a few exercises again before moving on to this one. So we're going to double underline the verbs and single underline the subjects. We're going to circle the subordinating conjunction. We're going to draw vertical lines to separate clauses and label them as either independent or dependent. And then in this little blank, we're going to label the sentence complex, CX, or compound complex, CD, CX. Okay? Let's take a look. I think that there's also going to be some just compound sentences in here, so I'm going to say that in the key compound would be this. Emily breaks out in hives whenever she eats strawberries. First thing I'm going to look for is my subordinating conjunction, which I'm going to circle. And then I'm going to check that what is on either side of it could be a clause. So this is supposed to be an independent clause. Let's see if it is. Emily breaks out in hives. Sure is, because Emily breaks out. And then over here, she eats strawberries. Sure thing. So that is the dividing line between my 2 clauses. And I said this was my independent clause, and this was my dependent clause. So I've got a complex sentence. Okay, let's do 1 and 2, and then I think I'm going to go down to the bottom and do 9. When ice is on the road, drive more carefully. I'm going to look again for my subordinating conjunction. I see it's when. When ice is on the road, I'm going to stop because there's a comma. Would that be my dependent clause? Yep, I've got a subordinating conjunction and a subject and a verb. So I'm going to draw my line there. Drive more cautiously. This is 2. Remember how our you understood? This is a you Understood. So this is an independent clause. It's got a subject. And then this is my dependent clause. So that's a complex sentence. So I've had a complex sentence both ways, with the independent clause first or with the independent clause last. And our difference in punctuation is that comma. Okay? Let's go and do 2. 2, just to tell you, is going to be a compound complex sentence. So that's why we're going to do it. After I heard Adele, I bought one of her CDs and I sent her a fan letter. Okay, so the first thing I'm seeing is this word after. That's a subordinating conjunction. I see a couple commas, so that might be the break in between my clauses. Let me test it out. After I heard Adele. That's a dependent clause because I've got a subject and a verb, and it's an incomplete thought with that after. I bought one of her CDs. I bought. And that's an independent clause because I'm stopping there at that comma. And I think this is another independent clause. I sent, yep. So what I have here is a compound complex sentence because I've got a dependent clause and 2 independent clauses. And my independent clauses are joined by the comma conjunction. Okay? Let me see if I can skip down to 9 for you. We'll have pizza for supper tonight if we get home before the store closes. Well, first of all, I'm not seeing any commas to kind of tip me off, so I'm going to look for subordinating conjunctions. And I see 2, actually. I see if, and I see before. So let me start maybe from the end here. Before the store closes. That has a subject and a verb. And there's my subordinating conjunction. So I'm guessing that that's my dependent clause. Let's take a look from here to the other subordinating conjunction where I drew the line. We get home. Same thing, subject, verb, subordinating conjunction. So that's a dependent clause too. Let's see if this is an independent clause, because I need at least one to make this a good sentence. We'll have pizza for supper tonight. Yep, I've got a subject and a verb. So that's my independent clause. I've got an independent clause and 2 dependent clauses. So this is a compound complex subject. Or sentence, excuse me. So I had 2 compound complex, one with 2 independent clauses and one with 2 dependent clauses. If you've got any questions, please ask me in class. For right now, see if you can do 3 or 4 on your own, and then we'll finish up the rest in the hour.